this presentation, so you all can come back to it if you need. And I'll also send the slides after we're done. There's some good resources in here, so that might be helpful to you all when you're starting to think about these kinds of poster presentations. Let me just make sure that I can see when other people are entering the room so I can let them in. Okay, cool. So today we're going to be talking about preparing posters and presentations for kind of a poster session at a conference. My name's Gabby, first of all. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Oceanography on the Bay campus. I'm in my 5th year of my PhD. I just defended recently, so I'm feeling pretty relieved. But today, we're going to spend most of our time talking about posters and how to present them in a concise and meaningful way, because sometimes at conferences, people are really busy and they get the gist of your work as quickly as possible. And it's also a really great way to network and perhaps find jobs. So let's get started. First, let's think of a time that you've attended a conference and listened to a poster presentation. It can be recently that you went to one or a while ago. Or actually, before we do that, can you guys either raise your hand or type in the chat, like me, if you have presented a poster presentation before? Okay, cool. Okay, great. So if you have or have not, that is totally fine. And hopefully, even if you have, I can give you some good tips for your next kind of poster presentation. Okay, so yeah, let's do this exercise. So think about a time that you listened to a poster presentation. And this could be in class. I know in my first year at grad school, we had to do a lot of like team poster presentations. So it can be, doesn't have to be at a conference. Okay, now let's think about some of the aspects of the poster itself that stood out to you. So if there was anything you can think of that you've seen on posters that you particularly like, can you type it in the chat? Or if you feel comfortable unmuting, that's fine too.
Personally, I'm usually drawn to posters that have images. I think
Nice.
it's nicer to look at and can sometimes draw you in.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. And that's Nara says that too. Good use of imagery, not too wordy. Yeah, images can really break up those big blocks of text too. Okay, nice. And then what about the actual style of the presenters speaking? Was there anything that stood out to you as effective in that? One thing that I really enjoy when I go to somebody's poster is when they actually like point to different things and kind of lead me along by showing me what they're talking about. That's always very helpful. Um, Giving a kind of brief overview of the sections of their poster and then leaving room for me to ask kind of deeper questions. I've really liked that in the past as well. Okay. And then lastly, with this little thought exercise, is there anything that has stood out to you either on a poster, like the actual look of it, or during a presentation that just, didn't feel quite as effective or was a bit, unsuccessful in the delivery? Josie, did you have something you wanted to share? Let's see. Nara says when the presenter is too nervous or unsure about their key results. Okay. Uh, Alani said less organized flow or structure. Yeah, definitely. Sometimes when it's pretty obvious, you can tell when somebody hasn't practiced or they don't know their kind of broader impacts of their research. They seem a little scatterbrained and like, oh, I forgot to mention this thing over here and this over here, and they're kind of jumping all around. Yeah, those are all really good examples. Okay, so now let's jump in. So, throughout this workshop, feel free to stop me if I'm moving too fast, and ask questions. You can ask them in the chat or unmute and say, Gabby, can you stop? Hold on, I have a question. Or raise your hand with the raise hand function in Zoom. Okay, so why are academic posters so important, and what is kind of the purpose of these posters? Well, first and foremost, I would say one of the biggest kind of advantages to doing these kinds of presentations is you get to have a lot of practice public speaking, and particularly speaking about your work in a concentrated amount of time. So you'll probably speak to 10 or more people coming to see your poster within like a 2 or 3 hour period. So that's a lot of talking and a lot of describing your research and answering questions. And that might seem daunting. But once you do the first two, usually I'd say it comes really naturally. And you all know your research better than anybody coming to your poster. So you're going to be able to answer their questions. And it's really a great opportunity for networking. So that's another reason why they're really important. People, colleagues of yours, peers will come up to ask you about your work, and this might give you a chance to network in the fact, or in the way of you're getting or gaining collaborators. So, like for me, for example, I'm doing computer modeling all the time, but sometimes people who are seagoing oceanographers will come up to me and, say, "Oh, we saw this in our data, like, and you're seeing this in your model. Maybe we should work together." And it's always a really good opportunity to meet peers and collaborate that way. It's also a pretty cool opportunity because professors or industry people, all kinds of professionals will be there at conferences as well. And that might be a way for you to get contacts in that field, and you can reach out to them later when you're looking for jobs. So that is really important. This is also a really kind of unique way to share your research findings before you've actually like published and they're done. One thing that's really exciting about that is sometimes, you can present your work and you can say that, I'm stuck with this or that. And somebody who's a expert in your field who you're talking to at your poster might give you kind of a direction to go with your data and your work. So it's also kind of a nice way to talk about where to go next, which is cool. And then, and that kind of goes with getting feedback as well. So where to go, what could you do better, what's another experiment that could make this kind of study even stronger, or what's a metric you haven't looked at that somebody else thinks is really important to your study, things of that nature. So there's lots of reasons why people like presenting academic posters. I think generally, as grad students, you'll have many opportunities to do this. And this will be the first site, and sometimes people even present in undergrad, but this might be your first introduction to it. But people all the way through, professorship present posters. So it's a good thing to kind of understand how to do in this kind of field. Okay. So before you start to actually make your poster, it's always good to get an idea of like the story you want to tell or what your kind of main points are. What do you want your audience to walk away understanding? Usually it's good to focus in on a few major points and not get too bogged down in details because you know your work so well and there might be so much nuance to it, but somebody who is coming to your poster who's a little bit outside of your field, what might be really important to them. So really think about the audience. So if you guys are presenting at the URI grad conference, for example, um, all graduate students are invited to be there. So as an oceanographer, I should have something on my poster that's easily understandable to a mechanical engineer or an English PhD. So having those kind of big topics that are easy to talk about and easy to understand are a good way to think of how you want to lay out your poster. And so from there, with those main points in mind, then you can kind of start to brainstorm different sections and how you want to lay out your poster. Um, I would definitely outline and draft whatever text you're going to put on the poster before actually compiling it onto the poster and make sure that you proofread it and checked it, all those kinds of good things before you actually go to print your poster.
Hi, how are you? How can I help you? I'm with the URI group. Do you know where they are for this training? Training? Cell phone training, yeah. Oh,
I'm gonna move that person. Okay. Alrighty. So next, one thing to keep in mind too is that there are plenty of different softwares for making posters. Um, I generally use PowerPoint. It's very easy to do. You can just manipulate the slide size in order to correspond with your poster size. People use Google Slides. I've seen people use Canva. Um, and then there are a couple of different poster templates that you can download online. Poster Nerd is one, BioRender is another one. I have links to these, so when I send the slides out to you all, um, you can use those for sure. But there's plenty of different things. I would say if you've never made a poster before, maybe starting with PowerPoint is just very simple to do. And we've all made a PowerPoint presentation before, so that might be a starting point. Okay, so formatting of your poster is going to be different depending on what conference or symposium you are presenting in. So just make sure you follow those guidelines, and then definitely you can make your, like I said, you can make your slide size the size of your poster. What you'll do is you'll basically save it as a PDF and then send it out to be printed, wherever there's a poster printer. So you can go to Staples, but I know there's also a couple on the main campus that your departments or department heads might know how to access. So you can always talk to them about that. Make sure that, they don't have specific guidelines for font sizes and colors. General rule of thumb, the large title at the top can be anywhere from 80 to 120 point font. I know that sounds gigantic, but some of these poster sizes can be like 3 by 2 feet, so they're pretty big. Think of, when you were a kid and you were presenting those trifold science boards, at like a science fair or something like that. That's kind of near the size that we're looking at, maybe a little bit bigger than that. So you want your headings and your titles to be clear, so that's why those points are so big for font size. You definitely don't want to go below 24 on your kind of written sections, like the blocks of text. That will be really hard for people to read, and honestly, pretty daunting for an audience member, and might turn somebody away from coming to your poster. Definitely utilize the use of bullets. Just bulleting out points is always very helpful. Bolding things that you want people to draw their attention to, and then those section headings for readability. And don't worry, we'll have a few different examples I'll show at the end. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you right now. Okay. So when you're reading a scientific poster, generally the rule of thumb is that you typically read from the top to bottom, left to right. So usually this like top left corner is where you want somebody to begin, right bottom corner is where you want somebody to end. So try to make sure your sections kind of follow that order. Let's see. And I'll show examples of different columns so you can see what it might look like. Definitely utilize white space. Having white space on a poster is not a bad thing, or whatever your background color is. You don't need to fill every single part of your poster with an image or text. That can be super overwhelming and kind of catch your reader off guard a bit. You can also use little boxes to kind of separate out your different sections. I think I've seen that pretty often, and it's usually really effective. Use color as an organizational tool. That could really draw the reader's eyes to different sections of your poster. I would say to try to stick to a few different colors, not too many, and make sure, if you're talking about if one figure has one kind of color scheme and you're using the same kind of parameters in that figure. So let's say I'm looking at concentrations of different kinds of seaweed in Narragansett Bay. And I color all the seaweed types one way in this figure. I should carry out that kind of denotation in my other figures as well. So you don't want to change it up on people so that they can just get good information from the beginning and follow it through kind of to the end, if that makes sense. Try to use a few different colors. Using like 3 to 5 colors is, I think, a pretty good rule of thumb. Also, if you're using like gradients, that's okay, but you don't want to have it looking too busy and too crazy. So just, use your creative eye and make sure that you're not overwhelming people looking at your poster. Okay. So there are a few different main sections of a poster, and typically this is how they're laid out. So it might differ depending on what discipline you're in, but usually we have our title at the top of our poster. That's usually the biggest kind of thing that draws people in. Your title is really important because if you're at a conference, that might be the first thing that somebody notices, and that's what they decide to come to your poster or your talk by just looking at the title. Because people are super busy at conferences. There's a lot of things all going on at the same time. So usually they'll look for things that they're interested by the title. And if your title doesn't catch their eye, then they might not put you on their list of, posters to visit or something like that. The other cool thing about having a nice title, you really want to state the main point, not the main like area of study. So what I mean by that is talk about maybe a key finding that your work highlights and not maybe the area of your work. So for example, I would talk about phytoplankton nutritional quality decreasing instead of saying phytoplankton in our ocean. Okay, that kind of gives somebody a better idea of what I'm going to be talking about. And there's something else I wanted to say about the title. Oh yeah. When you're not at your poster is going to be hanging up for, a certain period of time, and you're only going to be presenting at your poster for a small portion of that time. So while a conference is going on, people can kind of peruse through the poster hall and see which ones they're interested in. So that is another way that people can recognize different titles that really catch their eye, catch their interest. And so that is one way they'll say, okay, that title seemed interesting to me. I'll make sure to come back when somebody is there to present and I can talk to that person more. So title is really, really important. Below the title, usually we have all the different authors on the poster or on the research, your funding sources, or the different research groups that you're working with. Then we move into some of that like intro and background. So that is pretty general, but you want to set it up so that you're showing the problem or the area of interest and why it's important, and then how your work kind of fills a gap in the knowledge. That's usually what you're focusing on in that intro and background. And your research questions are basically those answers, or not answers, those are the questions that are addressing a knowledge gap in your field. So your intro and background should kind of set that up, and then you pose these questions. And then the methods is detailing basically how you sought to seek out this new information or to answer your research questions. In this section, it's for a poster. It's generally much better to include a few details, but having a kind of flow chart or a diagram or schematic that shows different steps that you went through. So on posters that I've presented, I really like just having a figure of kind of the workflow of what I've been doing. And then that way, when we get there, I can talk somebody through what this kind of diagram means. So it captures their attention because they're like, oh, that's an interesting figure. I don't really know what's going on there. So that gives me more space to talk about it and answer their questions. And then you have your results section. This is where you're going to include some of the different figures that you have and maybe some bullet points of the main findings. Try to make sure that all your images and figures are high resolution, because when they get blown up on that big poster, it's going to really show, and they might come out a little bit pixelated. So really double check that. Then there's a spot, you can call this discussion, broader impacts, conclusions, future directions, anything of that nature is a good thing to include on your poster. So basically, what is the big impact of what you found in your results? Or if you're like in the middle of your research and you don't have this big impact or these impactful findings yet, where are you going next? You did this kind of experiment. Maybe you saw that it didn't work. So your next direction is to do an experiment trying something else. Okay. And so here on the right too, this is one example of doing color-coded sections and going just top to bottom and having that one column kind of poster. This is really nice, especially if maybe you don't have the traditional kind of like questions, methods, results type work, and you just have a lot of these major points that you want to talk about. This might be a good way to convey that. Okay, so when you're sharing your main points of your research, really try to use figures that show important findings. I know that especially in my field in like science and oceanography, people make figures all the time that they think are really important and interesting, which they are, but they might not give enough information for a person outside of their field to see kind of the main point or why that matters. So don't just make a figure just because you can, or show extra data just because you can. Really make sure that everything you add to your poster has a purpose and aids in telling the story of your work. Make sure those axis labels are big so people can see what you're looking at. Try to be mindful of colorblind friendly color scales. I can send a link when I send these slides out to you all with it's like a little tester where you can put your figure in to see what it would look like to a person that has color blindness. That's really nice just to help people make sure that they can see the differences in your data and that kind of thing. So that's just one thing to consider anytime you're making figures. So when you're presenting your figures again, it's really nice to use more images and graphics when possible. That was one thing that somebody mentioned at the beginning that they liked about a poster, and I think that's really true. But I would be wary of going overboard. Sometimes, like on the left here, that's a lot of different figures and that's a lot of information. And so really try to think about if that amount of information is necessary and pare it down to maybe just a few of these figures just to show it as example. Try to be mindful of that. But here on the right, I think this is a very good example of a figure and then a nice little caption that gives a very clear description of what's going on in that figure. And then underneath that figure is where you could maybe put like what this means or kind of your interpretations of the data, just with a few different points. Okay, so some general things. So your poster should be mostly understandable without your explanation. So, like I said, these poster halls at conferences can be gigantic, and there's going to be, thousands of posters. People will go over to the poster hall when they're not like sitting in and listening to a talk. And so while people are perusing your posters, they should be able to get the gist of what you did without you being there, standing there, trying to explain it all to them. So really focus on having impactful and meaningful figures and diagrams instead of having large blocks of text. Because usually if people have to stop and read for a long time, more likely than not, they're just not going to do that. So if they can come up to your poster and see a few different figures that really are showing them what you did and connecting the different points that you've written in text to the next figure, that kind of thing, that would be really important and helpful for your reader. And the general rule of thumb is to think about like when your poster is up with hundreds or maybe thousands of different posters, is somebody going to stop and look at yours? Does it look nice? Does it capture somebody's eye? That's always one thing to keep in mind. Again, use figures and graphics over text whenever possible. I like these specifically. These are some of those examples of the like experimental design or even some background information as to, you know, how things are happening in a cell or this plant, that kind of thing. Definitely take advantage of negative space, which is basically having empty space to simplify your images, break up those blocks of text. Use a title that is likely to grab someone's attention. Typically, you want to err on the maybe the shorter, not the shorter side, but definitely not the longer side. So if your title is a long run-on sentence, that might not capture somebody's attention very quickly. And then when you're actually presenting, engage with your audience. So the first thing that you might want to do is, you know, introduce yourself, shake the person's hand that you're talking to, then just gesture to your poster as you're talking, and, you know, be friendly and polite. They'll know that, you know, you might be nervous and that's okay. It's a presentation, even though it seems, but it is also, keep in mind, it feels more like a conversation. So you don't have to put so much weight on it. It can be a little less formal than like a seminar presentation or an oral presentation that you might have given previously. So more tips for presenting. Your poster presentation should be kind of like an elevator pitch. You want to give the main highlights and the main points of each section in like 3 to 5 minutes. It's really nice to go through your poster, explaining the main points, and then leaving some time for questions, because this is where, you know, you could get some really valuable information. And this is where the kind of like networking and collaborations can happen. So if you do a nice, concise, and clear explanation of your work, people are more likely to, you know, ask questions that might be related to their work, but they can see the connection between what they do and what you do, and that really sparks some interesting discussions a lot of the time. So a general kind of template is you can start with a broad overview, like a kind of a thesis sentence or statement of, you know, what your research focuses on. Talk about why, or like the motivation behind your work and what sparked your questions. You can share a couple of your questions or hypotheses, walk them through the methods, rather not, you know, not quickly where it sounds like you're just, you know, brushing them off, but just not in too much detail that, you know, doesn't really matter to maybe a person who's a little bit outside of your field. And then you want to walk them through their different figures. Usually I like to first explain, you know, what they're looking at, like what is the y-axis, what is, or the y-axis, what is the x-axis, what do they mean? Make sure that kind of we're on the same page before I actually talk about what they should take from the figure. And then maybe the main conclusions or your discussion, broader impacts, future directions, that kind of thing. And then you can end on like, I would be happy to take any questions, or thank you for listening. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about? Those kinds of things. So this is usually a good way to give a nice little overview and leave an opening for them to lead the conversation in a way that is interesting for both of you. Definitely try to practice your poster explanation a couple of times. Try to keep it to 3 to 5 minutes. So time yourself a couple of times, maybe practice with your lab mates or, maybe roommates or family member. It's a really quick pitch. So if you can explain it to somebody who really doesn't know your work, that could be a really great practice. And then one thing I always like to do is practice with some people that are either in my department or in my lab, because they might ask questions, and that's how I can kind of anticipate what kind of questions I might get. Otherwise, you can just think about, what is important in your field and how this might relate to some of these larger questions. Maybe that's what people will focus on. Think about the conference that you are attending. If it is, like the URI grad conference, you might get more basic questions because it's a wide audience. I might come to your poster and I have no idea about, historic textiles. I think that was what Emma said that she studies. Yeah, but I have no idea about that. So you might have, or the questions you might get from me might be very basic or very easy compared to what you usually get from faculty members or your classmates, things like that. So keep in mind what your audience is like, and that might also help you anticipate different questions you might get. It's always great to dress for success, so try to dress professionally. Then if somebody stops in front of your poster and begins to read, offer to give your explanation. Try to make eye contact and say, introduce yourself as they're approaching your poster. That's always great. Speak loudly and clearly. There's going to be a lot of people talking around you, and that can be really distracting and sometimes hard to present. So maybe practice thinking about your pitch, maybe like in a coffee shop or something. Just see if you can run through it in your head while there's a lot of little conversations going around. That is one thing that's hard with poster sessions. But like I said, these are really about networking and sharing your research. So as people are coming up, don't be afraid to make connections with people that are visiting your poster. You can, reach out to them on LinkedIn, or I know some people who are in the like job search mode have resumes or their CVs on hand just in case they want to give it to somebody who might be offering a position. So that's one thing to think about. Definitely not necessary, but one thing to think about. Okay, there are quite a few common things that people that show up in these poster presentations. So one, I think a few of you mentioned it earlier, is that the poster is really crowded. It's a little bit disorganized or inconsistent, really hard to read. Maybe the presenter shows really complicated data, but doesn't really show, the broader impact or why it matters or what they learned from it. So that can be hard. The poster has way too many words on it, so it ends up conveying not very much and is not really memorable. And then maybe the poster doesn't have enough background information for someone to understand the poster without the presenter there. So again, with that background info, some diagrams and visual aids are always helpful, but then bullet points are great. Really kind of walk your reader through like the area that you're studying, what are the major problems, what are the major knowledge gaps, and then what is your work doing to kind of answer or fill that knowledge gap. Okay, so I'm going to show a couple of examples of posters now. So this is one of my examples of a not awesome poster. Can anybody maybe in the chat or unmute? What do you guys notice about this poster? What don't you like? What do you like about it? Things like that.
It's too wordy. The background is really it's distracting, and it's just all over the place. But I do appreciate the the interesting pigs in space.
Yeah. Yeah, the title is really eye-catching and really good. I think that's definitely true, and I agree. It does feel all over the place. The background's a little distracting. There's a lot of text and not a lot of images. And I don't know, the pigs in space, that feels like you could put so many cool images on here. I don't know what their research is. Usually some of these figures might give us an idea of what they were doing. Yeah, I agree with all of that, Nara. Anything else people notice? Okay, yeah. So pretty disorganized, a lot of words. The text is really small. The background is pretty distracting, but I do like their title, and I like that the section headings are a different color to draw your eye. That's helpful. But yeah, it's not my favorite poster. I really like the title though. Okay, this one is blurry because I'm not sure why. But besides it being blurry, what do you guys notice about this? And there's obviously some hints on here, but
It's me again. Yeah, I would imagine it'll be really hard to read all of that when it's presented on the poster board because the font is too small.
yeah, definitely. I agree. Um, and one thing to keep in mind, yeah, you don't need to put your abstract on the poster. Usually your abstracts will be on like a website or something that's associated with the conference. So people can look through on their phone at different poster titles, and then they can click on it and then see your abstract. So your abstract really doesn't need to go on the poster usually. But some people do, and that's okay. But it does take up a lot of space, and it's just a large block of text, so it's not always recommended. Then there are some figures here which are nice, but they're really small. The text on them is really small. It might be hard to focus in, especially in this figure here in the middle. It seems like there's, I can't tell if this is one figure and this is one figure, or, how that's supposed to be split up. So it might be a little confusing. The section breaks are there. They're kind of small, and that might be nice to focus on a little bit more. Yeah, it's just pretty crammed a little bit, too much text. I would also say this is not my favorite title, but that's okay. I'm sure it's maybe better in different fields. So if this were at a conference where it was a highly specialized conference, this might be a perfectly fine title. But when you're thinking about your audience, for, you know, the URI conference, it's maybe not the best title. As an oceanographer, I would read that and say, no, thanks. All right, so now let's look at a couple of really, I think, nice examples. Okay, so anything you guys like or dislike about this poster?
I like the use of images, but the background is a bit still distracting for me.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the background is cute, but it is distracting. I think having these main three kind of figures are really helpful. Having a bulleted introduction is good, and then here at the bottom, they like bold and make it a little bit bigger, about like the main aim or objective of the study. The sections are pretty clearly labeled. Um, and you know, these kinds of blocks of text is not too bad. People are happy to read a bulleted list rather than paragraphs of text, even though they kind of look similar. It's a little less daunting to a lot of people. Okay, so that's one example. And then here's another example that I really like. I think it's a pretty nice poster. Feels like a poster that somebody could like hang up in their office or their room. Um, Anybody want to say anything about this one? I really like that each section title is a little bit unique. It's not just intro methods, results, you know, whatever. It's talking about more like main points, and always connecting it back to, you know, the crabs that they're studying, which is cool. I like this big figure here in the middle. It makes it very obvious that this person is talking about crabs. So I really like that. Yeah, Nara said I would buy it. Me too. I really like it. And then the other thing is that there's some nice figures that are not just data. So they have this intro figure, it's showing where these kind of species are found. Then they have this little bit of a methods figure, how they collected it, where they were. Then they have some data, which is nice. And each of the graphs have a little bit of a description next to them. Then they have a little bit more of analysis and method descriptions here. And then they have this nice figure at the bottom about, you know, what's next. What are they going to do after this? Looks like they're going to do some genomics, some DNA sequencing, and try to match it with what other species they're looking for. And then they have this section down at the very bottom, which gives the larger implications or these broader impacts. So this is a really nice example of a poster, but all of you can do these kinds of things. This, I think, was made in, I think they said they made it in Canva. So it's definitely achievable. But having these kinds of section headings and pictures and fewer words, I think, is really eye-catching and aesthetically pleasing for people to approach your poster. Okay, so I have a few different resources on, you know, how to make effective posters, all these kinds of things. I will send this to you so you guys can have it. And as always, you are all free to come to the Graduate Writing Center, make appointments, these one-on-one appointments to look at your poster, to practice your poster presentation. Any of us would be more than happy to give you feedback, maybe even practice, what kind of questions a person outside your field might ask so you can prepare in that way. But yeah, that is all I have for you all today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat, unmute. But otherwise, that is all I have for you today. So thank you all for coming to this workshop.
Hi, Gabby. I have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that earlier that people usually print their poster like and staples and such, but there are some resources on campus.
Mhm.
Do you know if it's like offered by the IT services or like by the bookshop or something?
I will get back to you on that. I know
Hmm.
that, like for us at Bay Campus, we send them to our IT person and they print them somewhere on
Okay.
the main campus.
Right. In a black
Um,
box.
yeah, it's like a black box that I just don't know about.
Right.
But I can ask and I can email you who's a good person to contact. And you're in
Okay.
Green Affairs, right, Nara?
Yes, I mean, in the Kingston campus, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I can ask around and see what's the process like on the main campus and I
Uh,
can let you know.
and also, do you know if there's like, does URI have a certain policy on using their logo on the poster? Because I know some organizations have certain policies on where to put their logo and etc.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think just as long if you look on the URI website, if you
Uh,
just type in like URI logo for presentations,
okay,
it should pop up. And I
right.
think you can put it anywhere on your poster. I don't think
Uh,
there's anything specific.
okay,
But they do have different logos that they ask people to use if they're going to use them.
right. Okay. Thank you so much, Gabby.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Josie. All right. If there are no more questions, I will end the recording.